Today our guest speaker is Zain Zafar. I mean, he was like us mostly. He was a developer, and then he is part of a few startups, and there are a few which have been very successful. And one of the important one, which I think he was the co-founder with Adil, is Mailmunch.
Yeah, Mailmunch.
So, and I think there is another introduction for Zain, which I want to share with people, that he is a younger brother of Ali Zafar, the famous Pakistani singer as well as actor. So I mean, I know, I think it's still, I have a good feeling having a brother in showbiz, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's always been, yeah, I mean, a great feeling having that.
All right. So I'll let you take the mic and go for it.
Okay. So I'll just start off with a brief introduction of myself, and then we'll take it from there. So my name is Zain Zafar. I'm from Lahore, Pakistan. I moved to US in 2014 at a startup in DC. And then from there, I've been, ever since my childhood, I've been really intrigued by computers and coding and all that stuff. Started coding back in grade. So I got my first computer in 99. I was literally like 14 years old. And then I just hit it off with coding. And back then there used to be this MIRC chat tool. So I used to, me and my friend Adil, we used to code a lot of different things in that and had our own scripts. So that is where my coding journey started. And then from MIRC moved towards web. On web, I explored different technologies, starting off with ASP. There was another friend of mine, Umar, who sort of funneled my interest towards that. So ASP, and then eventually PHP, and then Ruby on Rails, then moved into Node.js. All along also sort of kept working with the JavaScript front-end side, but Naeem Bhai knows, to the core, my expertise is in the back-end side of the things. So architecturally managing stuff and making sure that all the bits and pieces work in sync with each other is something that I really take immense interest in. And now, as we talk today, I've seen the technology paradigm shift from basic PHP and ASP to Node.js, GraphQL, React, and all that stuff. So you guys are really lucky. The foundations that you guys are starting off is something that we really aspired back in our time, that we didn't have these tools and toolkits and Docker and all that stuff. GitHub, for that matter, I remember when it first started gaining traction back then. You used to have SV, and Naeem Bhai must know about that. So yeah, that is my journey. Like Naeem Bhai said, Mailmunch, we started in 2014, late 2014, and it sort of took off. And ever since, we've expanded it. And it's an email marketing suite and lead generation. So we've expanded it with a lot of different things, and the architectural side of it has grown immensely. So if I'll see if I can pull up the chart of the services and tools that we use to sort of make everything run smoothly. It ranges from a lot of different microservices to a lot of different vendors like AWS, Heroku, Memcache, and then data sources, Redis, Mongo, Elasticsearch, you name it. And we have that piece of technology somewhere in between the entire architectural infrastructure. So I'm really fascinated by all this, but I know I have a lot to learn myself. So up until now, my journey, whatever I've learned, I'll sort of try to give you guys the gist of it. And if you guys have any questions after that, I'll be glad to help to answer you with that.
Thank you, Zain. So let me give you a brief overview of what the audience are, right? So that I think you have. I think I gave you an idea, but we have some high schoolers here. Mm-hmm. We have some who are in college. Mm-hmm. And we have some who have college graduates also, and some people like myself also here. So there's a wide range of people, but I think we as a team are working really well. And if you had a chance to see one or two of our videos, you would see that these, I mean, kids have gone together and done amazing job in building that app, which we are trying to build.
Yeah. So could you also just briefly give me the idea of, I mean, a one-liner idea of the app and the tech stack that you guys are currently using?
Okay, so we will show you the app in the end because we want to get your feedback.
Okay,
so
okay,
basically what we are doing is we are building an app for the Mountain House Muslim. And then it has mainly 3 projects going on. One is a membership, where we are storing all the members' data, including the dependents and guardians and all kind of stuff. So, and then we have payment. The other team is working on the payment stuff, which we are working for both PayPal and Stripe. Okay. And we are working on, we are very close to, and want to get your feedback on that also. And then the third part is the activities. Like we have Sunday school activity or sports activities which you're doing. We want to be able to define all the activities which MHMA is doing, and then allow people to register those activities. So, and all of them has the central piece is the membership, because all the members will have access to the payments and to the activities, and their children and all that stuff is interlinked. So that's our app. And the stack we have is the database is Mongo. The backend is Node.js, Express, using Express, we're building REST APIs. And on the front end, we have React.
Okay.
So that's what I think, like you said earlier, that this is probably the stack, which is very popular.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for the fresher over there. So I'll just give you to start off the topics that I'm gonna cover today include so you guys are already using the Node and Express, and with that you're using the REST API. So I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of different perspective out of that, which is you could, I mean, instead of REST or in addition to REST, some companies are now also moving towards the Graphql API. So what drives that decision, and what are the benefits and advantages of doing that versus what are the sort of advantages of being using the REST as it compares to different applications and building the front end and all that stuff. So primarily I'm going to dig into the GraphQL concept and all that stuff, and then a little bit of comparison with REST. And then afterwards, we can do a little bit of small coding exercise just to give you a brief idea, because I myself am a coder. If I read something, I sort of get bored, and I'd like to quickly jump into and see the exact codes examples. So if my assumption is, or at least my presumption is, that you guys would probably be somewhere on the same tangent when it comes to, you know, hearing boring stuff rather than coding actually practically. So let me share my screen.
So sorry to interrupt you again. Were you able to send the information, the conference information, Zoom information?
Yeah, I did. Yep, I did.
Okay.
I think Mars already joined. Yeah, I was.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Yep. So, okay, so let's start off with GraphQL. What exactly is GraphQL? So you guys have all seen Facebook, all the complex components that they have, all the newsfeed stuff, the comments, and ever refreshing real-time feed that they have, videos and all this stuff. So that's a pretty complex UI that they've built. So on the front, so while building that, Facebook built a lot of internal tools to help them basically make things in a way which are scalable, and also help the developer community by making them open source. So two of the things that got really popular out of that is, one is the front end side and one is the back end side. So on the front end, the React stuff it really took off, and everybody was like, wow, this is amazing. Before React, there were different apps like Angular from Google, and then there used to be Backbone and all those different libraries that people used to use. On the very low level, people also used to use the jQuery library, which is, I mean, despised upon now when it comes to React and all that stuff. So one, on the client end side, it was React. And then on the backend side, the thing that sort of powered React into the way that it is also the GraphQL. So the GraphQL, if you if you, yeah, it was developed by Facebook in 2012 and it was made public 2015 after they had sort of all released it online and tested and everything. Started off as an open source, it still is open source. At the very basic level, it's just an API endpoint. That's it. It's nothing fancier than that. It's just one endpoint. You hit that endpoint, you get the results, and that's it. That is exactly what you do with the REST. But the difference, I'm gonna get into those a little bit further down the slides. That'll make it a little more clear to you. With GraphQL, just keep in mind that since REST has defined resources, GraphQL is all defined in a schema itself. So what that schema looks like, I'll also show you the code examples afterwards. And then the GraphQL, just think of GraphQL as a layer between the backend and the front end. So you could have a lot of different data sources. For example, in your case, the data is coming from MongoDB. So down the road, you could also say if you're having scaling issues, you decide to sort of sync the data with Elasticsearch or different DynamoDB or whatever. GraphQL will remain the same. It'll connect to all those different data sources and still remain the same layer. So the client doesn't have to think about all those intricacies and stuff like that. So that is where the basic concept of GraphQL is. It's just a single API endpoint. You hit it, you fetch the data, and that's it. So moving forward, let's start off with the similarities with the REST. Once we know these, the differences will be, you'll be much easier to understand the differences once you've gotten the grasp of this. So in REST, you have different resources. Like you have a book resource. I don't know if in case of this app, you probably have a user resource. You have maybe a subscription resource. And then all those resources are represented by different URL endpoints. So you'll have /users/1, let's say, that will represent a user resource with ID 1. With GraphQL, those resources are also there, but they are called types. So we will have a user type in GraphQL, subscription type in GraphQL, and just like that. So that's one of the similarities. The other one is the same thing that I just mentioned in my start. Both of them are simply a URL endpoint. You hit them with a certain format. With the REST, REST is pretty easy to look at, and it's pretty simple to understand. You know exactly if you're hitting /book/1, nobody would need to know any database structure, and you'll automatically know that this will return a book with an ID 1. With GraphQL, because it's a unified API endpoint, you sort of request the resources or types, as I said in GraphQL, by passing in the query string. So that is how you query and fetch data in GraphQL. And then both of them return data in JSON format, unless you have let's not talk about SOAP and all that stuff. Yeah, so both of them return the data in JSON format. So these are basically pretty much the similarities in this. And if you go towards the differences, that is where I personally believe the GraphQL shines. So in REST, a URL identifies the resource. Just like I mentioned, /book/1 is a resource of a book with ID 1. But in GraphQL, the URL itself does not know the identity that you're going to fetch. So the same URL could be returning a book, could be returning an employee, could be returning the user, depending on whatever the information has been asked to that API endpoint by the client. So in GraphQL, while we design the server pretty much independently, the client is sort of, the one that is commanding information. The client says, I need this, I need this, I need this. The server is just responding to the client and nothing else. And because of this, in the next slide, I'll show you what exactly happens and what the main difference is going to become more clear in that. So let's get to the other point. So in REST, the shape and resource of the shape and size of the resource is determined by the server. So for example, you have this endpoint /book/1. So the server, when writing this endpoint, you're gonna make sure that the endpoint returns a JSON object, which is basically returning the ID of the book, name of the book, author of the book, this ISO code of the book, and all those things. But with GraphQL, the client is as I said, is the commander, and the client could only be asking for the ID or name, or it could only be asking for the title of the book, nothing else. So that is one of the main key differences as well. So in REST, the server basically commands the entire type and structure of the resource. In GraphQL, the client sort of asks the server for that. And then in REST, you have different routes. So for example, if you want to fetch books under an author, you could probably have a route that is like /authors/1/books, and that'll give you all the books for the author with ID 1. But in GraphQL, that is sort of handled by the way the schema is structured. And we'll also get to that in an actual example to show you what that exactly means. So keeping this in mind, this is one example where we are comparing the REST and GraphQL API. So this is a blog, let's say, and it has posts, comments, and authors. So in REST API, if you want to fetch these 3 different things, you'll have 3 different API calls normally. You'll fetch the posts, you'll fetch the comments, you probably pass the author ID or whatever in the comments query string in REST API, and then there's another endpoint to fetch the authors. Unless I know there are certain in the REST API's API spec, there are ways to sort of include different things, but generally this is the case. You do different requests. Client side makes a request to authors, posts, and comments, and then sort of fetches the data and processes the data client side, and then displays that. These are 3 different API calls. With GraphQL, you'll make one API call. You'll get all the posts, and within the post, you'll have their author names embedded. Within the post, you'll have the comments embedded. And how are those going to be structured is what the client is going to dictate. So the client will get all autonomy. In this case, it'll hit one API endpoint and get the data for all 3. And that is how it basically reduces the number of requests and round trips to the server. So one thing that I wanted to mention earlier that I forgot is that one of the basic principles of GraphQL and React, also GraphQL primarily, is also that whatever the information that the client needs is only the information the client is going to get. It's not going to get anything extra other than that information. With an API, with a REST API endpoint, you'll probably get a whole lot of JSON payload, and you'll end up ignoring, let's say, 4 or 5 fields or whatever. That'll increase the data size that's coming from the server. But with GraphQL, you'll get exactly what you're asking for, nothing more and nothing less. So, okay, let's move forward. So, yeah.
Before you go there, so do you guys have any questions so far? I think we want to make sure that you guys are following what we're talking about. Everyone is on pace, or you guys are confused or anything? I want to see thumbs up or thumbs down.
So I had a question.
Okay.
What does the /authors do? Because I know what posts and comments does. I was wondering what authors does.
/authors?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in REST, so /authors is also a REST API endpoint, which will return you the list of all authors in the database. So an author is a post owner. So I could sign up as an author, as Zain Zafar on a blog, and I'll have my posts. So those posts will have an author, the post table will have an author ID column, and that'll link to my authors table row, which says Zain Zafar. Does it make sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you guys look at it, that there are 2 different technologies or 2 different methods of accessing the data from the database, right? So that's really the purpose. So we are using the method which is on the left side today. So we have today like members, /members. We also have /payments, and we also have /activities, which you all 3 teams are working separately. So if we map that into the GraphQL world, so those will be handled by the same GraphQL API, and all the structure which needs to be requested, that will be controlled by the client. And we will so Zain will get into it, and I think we do have the requirements like that, and that's why I wanted to stop here, because like, for example, we have members data. Our members data has all the members and all their dependents as rows in that document. And then when we access the members data, we want to access all the member and all their dependents together in one shot. So I believe we should be able to do that. And I think I'll hold this question for end, but just wanted to give perspective to everyone so that they can stay on pace.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Okay, perfect.
I have one question.
Go ahead.
So maybe the things will get clear later on, but as you said, the GraphQL is, we are fetching only the data which we need at the client side. In case of REST API, we are, having the whole data, and then we are getting the specifics, what we want at the client side. But here in the figure, if we see, GraphQL is bringing everything, and then at the UI side, we are separating the post and comments and authors. So it's kind of confusing picture.
So okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's a good question. So on the GraphQL, so on the REST side, I would assume that the /post endpoint will return all the posts, and each within that array of posts, each object will have all the detail related to that post. So it'll have the ID, post, name, and all that stuff. On the GraphQL, let's say if you're just showing the titles of the posts and nothing else, let's say there's a UI where you're showing the post title, the number of comments, and the author of that post. So now you only need 3 different data points: the title of the post, one number which represents the comments, and the name of the author. This GraphQL call that you see on the right could be structured in a way that the resulting JSON object is exactly this. It'll be an array, and each object in that array will have 3 things: post title, the number of comments, and the author. That's it. Nothing more and nothing less. And that is all that the UI needs in this particular case. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and on the left side, when in order to get this kind of a data, you will have to get the post separately, comments separately, author separately, and then you have to manage that data on the front end to get that object. So that's really what the crux of it.
So all the data related to one post, you can get it in one fetch,
in one
request.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so this is basically what, so I talked about the GraphQL schema in the beginning. It's basically, just think of that. This is a schema that I got as an example, but we can also discuss the schema that you guys have. So there are some keywords when it comes to GraphQL, some reserved words. And one of that reserved word is query, which you see at the top left. The other reserved word is a mutation, okay? And then, so what happens is that in GraphQL, you say that these are my queries and these are my mutations. So query is like a get endpoint. So when you're writing a query, you're only fetching information. You're not making any change to that data. It's just going to return the data to you on the client end. With mutations, GraphQL, if you want to manipulate the data, for example, if you want to update the post title or something like that, that is called a mutation. So you're mutating the data. That is where you'll add the mutations in GraphQL under the type mutation. So these 2 are reserved keywords. So this is nothing rocket science in these 2 keywords. GraphQL knows the meaning of these 2 keywords. Everything under the query bracket parenthesis is categorized as queries. And then everything under the mutation is categorized as mutations. And then further, once you have the queries and mutations, you define your types. So over here, it's not expanded, but I'm defining a type of book. But if you see on the right side, this is what the book type would look like. It has an ID. And by the way, the types on the right side are also reserved keywords of GraphQL. So GraphQL knows what an ID is. And then there's a title in this book that's a string type, just like a database. Then there's a published keyword, published key, which is a date, price, which is a string. And then this is very interesting. So author is a separate type in here. And where is that being defined? Underneath this. So within a GraphQL type, we are referring another type. So what happens is that once we call an author, we're going to get all of these things. I'll get into the code, VS Code, and explain you how this exactly works. But this is just to reiterate, any GraphQL keyword can return another type of a GraphQL object. So a book can have an author. And similarly, if you see the type author, within that author, we have a books key, which is returning the book, array of book. And if you have something in square brackets, that means it's an array of books. So it will return multiple objects of that. So now just make a mind map out of this. A book is returning an author, and an author is returning a book, a set of books. And again, book, author, author, book. So this is how the graph is basically built. This is exactly the GraphQL that we're talking about, that we can go from author to book to author to book to any way that we want. We can move around the graph any way we want, any way the client wants. That's exactly the concept of GraphQL. And do you guys have any questions about this, by the way? We'll get into this further while coding, but just any instant question that you guys could think of.
So from the technology side, Zain, do we need to have Express if we are using GraphQL?
So yeah, that's a very good question. You can use GraphQL with Express, and there's a separate server, I'll talk about that, which sort of just plugs directly in Node.js and exposes a /GraphQL endpoint. That's it.
Okay.
So that server also runs on Express at the backend. So Express, you can do that. Yes, to answer your question, yes. Express can be tied up with Graph. So we have an app where we have that app runs on written in Express, Node.js. Sorry, written in Node.js, has Express. All the REST endpoints are there, and the /GraphQL endpoint funnels it into the GraphQL server. That's it.
Perfect. Yeah. So basically, we, from our application perspective, since we already have REST APIs, we can just extend them.
Yeah, you can plug GraphQL into the same basically application. You can have the REST and GraphQL live simultaneously.
Perfect.
Coexist with each other. Yeah.
Does that make sense to everyone? I hope it does, but I just want to make sure Rafe or Subhan, especially you guys have worked on the backend side, and Afif as well. So you guys understand what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm following. Yeah, I'm following.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay, so after this, so now the next question is that we sort of have an idea of what the GraphQL is, what's the server, what's the how does the client access that? So what technology do we use? So luckily there's a company, it's called Apollo. They have created it's one of the most popular GraphQL servers out there. So GraphQL is basically, by the way, a spec sheet. You can go and write your own GraphQL server for that. Facebook has its own, I believe it was called Facebook Relay. I'm not sure if it's the same name or whatever, but Apollo company also created their own GraphQL server. And this is by far the most feature-rich and easiest way to implement GraphQL, server as well as a client. So their client sort of hooks directly into React. And they have React hooks support as well. So I'll get into that after in a short while. So this is a visual representation of what that looks like. So these at the bottom are your data sources. Just see, so database would be MongoDB. A microservice could be any microservice that sort of presents that data. And interestingly, you also see a REST API here. I won't get into a lot of detail about this, but with GraphQL, there are add-ons which make a RESTful API automatically translate to GraphQL requests. So even if you have your already RESTful APIs, you can have a separate GraphQL server, and the client would not know about the REST API. The client will still contact the GraphQL server, and at the back end, the GraphQL server will connect the REST API and then send the response back. So it'll be easier for the client, but at the back end, you can do whatever. You can plug whatever data sources that you want. And then once you have this GraphQL server, you can sort of, the client could be anything, could be an iOS device, web, and whatever you guys want. So, and then Apollo provides support for both the server as well as the client. So let's get into the coding bit a little bit. That's the exciting part. Wait, let me see. So there are two different approaches that I can take. I thought I'll discuss and share it with you. I have a complete running example, and I can also start from scratch with a very basic app. So what do you guys prefer? I can share a complete app. I mean, it's still basic, but a code of the completed app, or we can start from scratch and just quickly ramp up things.
I'm not sure if we have enough time, but I think from scratch might be nice. But I mean, Naimok, I think it's up to you.
No, I am fine. It's enough time is up to you guys, right? If you guys want to stay, I'm waiting, and Mrs. Zain, I think, already committed to help us. So let's try to get started from the scratch, and if it takes too long, then we probably can shift.
Okay. So I'll start from the scratch, and then within the same example, I also made some modifications. I'll just show that code towards the end to make it more, fun. So this is the ApolloGraphql.com website. You see Apollo server, and they have Apollo server and Apollo client. So this is the server URL. This is the client URL. I have listed these URLs in my presentation. I'll share that with you as well. You can, everything is on that deck. So let's start off. I'll just open my terminal. Do you guys see my terminal, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So here, mountain house demo. Okay, mountain house demo. Oh wait, let's do this here, this here. So we already did this. So right now we're doing the server. Let's actually make a server directory in there as well. So npm init. Let's install. So this is the Apollo server that I was talking about. This already has the Express support and all that stuff built in. It's sort of a plug and play library. So I'll copy this. I'll do this. npm install. That's done. Let's do this. Touch index. So now they're asking me to define the schema. Let me copy all of this, and then, in fact, let's copy paste this. Copy. Do you guys also see the VS Code editor?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the index file that the goddess created. Did this. And then we have to define your data set. Define the data set. This will, by the way, this is just a hard-coded data set of array, but in your case, this will be coming from MongoDB. So, but since that's like a longer project time taking, we just hard-coding this as an array of 2 books, which has an author name and an author and title. So we need to define a resolver. This is where the magic happens. And then that's simply this is the command that just starts the server. Save this and Node.js, copy, and there we go. So the server is running at 4,000. Let's copy this, go here, paste this. So this is the server. So now something very interesting with GraphQL. So if you guys, so let's say I'm talking to you guys and you tell me that you have a REST API. How would I know that what API endpoints that you guys have? I will have to ask you guys, can you please share the API docs, and you'll have to make those docs and all that stuff. But with GraphQL, when I say that, can you please share me the GraphQL schema? All you have to do is give me this URL, and I'll then click on this. This is also Apollo GraphQL's service. So GraphQL basically exposes the schema right away.
Oh.
So what that means is that you don't have to ask the guy who coded the backend server. If you are a front-end developer, you'll just go here. You'll notice, oh, so there are 2 objects that I can query. One is a book object. And if I query a book object, I can get the author name and the title. That's great. So as a front-end developer, I didn't have to look at the code. I can just spec the GraphQL schema. That is something that's very native to GraphQL, is that it exposes the schema in a way that the front-end guys, they don't need to sort of bug the back-end guy and ask them, hey, have you done this, that, or not? We in our company, we have a lot of different examples where the back-end guys were working on a feature, they coded all that stuff, posted it on GraphQL, and the front-end guys didn't even have to talk to them. They just went and saw the GraphQL schema. They knew what exactly new mutations are available. new queries are available, and implemented that, and the task was launched. With REST, at least in my experience, you sort of have to collaborate and see what the API endpoint, you need the docs and all that stuff. So that is something that's really exciting about GraphQL, that once you once the schema is available, you don't need to talk to the backend guys. So, and then there's this query. So there are three different things: objects, scalars. You can ignore the scalars for now, and query. So what can you query from the GraphQL server? You can query the books. And what is it going to return? It's going to return an array of book type. So you automatically know that it's going to be an array, and it'll have objects of book type. So, and if I click on book, I'll know it has author and title. So I'm completely aware of this. So now let's go and write one query and see if the server returns me the same. Let me see if I can do it. Okay, so I'll write a query that, so see, it automatically also auto completes. I can query the books, and then within the books, I'll get the author, and that's it. So now to answer, I think Tanya, you asked me. So you do see that the book also has a title field, but I'm not gonna, the client, think of this, by the way, as the client side. I'm not gonna ask the server for the title, and let's see what the server sends me back. If I run this, the server is only sending me an array of books with author in there. It is not sending me the title. But if, let's say, I want to also fetch the title, I can just go here and write title. And now if I run the query, I'm also getting the title, right? So this is how the client can manipulate the data that's coming from the server. Does that make sense? Anybody, any questions up until now?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so that was pretty quick. We're done with the server. Let's get to the client now. So Apollo client. So we're going to use the create React app template. And this is the command for that. So we were on the server. Let's go create a client folder in there. So we have, yeah, so we're creating a client. I'm pretty sure this thing is more exciting than the initial 20 minutes.
So if I'm doing a query to MongoDB and I have multiple collections, was this like make it easy with GraphQL, because I will have one query to multiple collections at the same time?
So that totally depends on your use case. So if you have a use case where, but let's say you are showing some aggregate analytics data on some page, you're showing the membership count or revenue or whatever. If let's say there are 3-4 numbers that are coming from 3-4 different MongoDB collections, and you want to make one API call to sort of get all those numbers, yes, you can define. So in GraphQL, the types are all that you define. You can define a type that says analytics, and within analytics, you'll define membership count, integer, revenue, integer, and all that stuff. And then how is that integer going to be filled is where the resolvers in GraphQL come in. So for that particular field, let's say the field is the membership count, you'll write a resolver. Within that resolver, you're going to go and fetch the MongoDB and all that stuff, and then find and then return an integer. So that is where the magic happens in GraphQL. So there are resolvers which basically resolve to the values for the fields that you define in your type. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we have the React app already. If we do yarn start, oh no, wait, I think we have to do yarn, oh, cd client, yarn start. So okay. So do you guys see the React server?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so now on 4,000, we have the GraphQL server. On 3,000, we have the React app. So we need to make a way for the React frontend app to connect to the GraphQL server. and then show us the books and all that stuff, right? But let's keep on following the example, the tutorial over here. So we're gonna set this up. We already did that. We're not gonna do the npm install here on client. Let's do that. To import this. Actually, this is the so let's import this. Let's go to the okay, so on the client, we have source index.js asking me to do this. Then it's asking me to do this. Then I have to do this. Then I have to do, oh wait, that's like all of that. After that, I was testing the exchange. Okay, let's do this. Okay, first let's see if the app is working or not. I just did this. I'm gonna refresh this. Okay, use queries. Okay, so my first Apollo app. So Apollo package is installed. Now it's asking me to, after you've hooked up, you start requesting data with use query. Use query is a React hook. I'll also get a little bit into the what the React hooks are. And let's first define the query we want to actually go in Graphql. Okay. So this is the GraphQL query that we're gonna make, get exchange rates. And then this is a function. This is a React function. And then within this, my first Apollo app, we're gonna write this exchange rates. Now, if we save this and refresh, so we are getting the exchange rates all the way from the web, whatever. So now what exactly did happen here? Let's look at the code now. So we created an Apollo client, and when creating an Apollo client, we give a URL of the Apollo GraphQL server. So this URL in this example is basically a GraphQL server that returns a exchange rate schema. If I open this directly, you can, this is by the way, a GraphQL playground. You can also, this is just another form of the studio, this thing. I mean, you can also use the playground, or these are two different tools of the same thing, for the same thing. So I'm gonna go to the schema. I can, oh sorry, docs. I can see that there's a query, rates query, in which the currency is returned. So if I type a query here and I say, now, this is the first time, by the way, that I'm querying this database, and I don't know what the backend guy did, but I can look at the GraphQL database and sort of try to figure it out. So I know that we can find the rates, and then within those rates, it's going to return me. In fact, let's do this. Rates takes an argument of currency, which is a string. So I will pass it USD, and what it's going to return is multiple exchange rates, and then I can fetch the currency, rate, and name. Let's see what this does. See? So nobody told me what the API spec was, but I was sort of able to fetch that using the GraphQL schema. So this is what the data is coming for me. And now if I want, let's say I don't want the name, I can take it out and the server will stop sending me that. So just to give you, so what exactly happened in this example is also the same thing. We ran this GraphQL query. We only got the currency and rate, and then we loop through those values. And you guys are familiar with React, by the way, basic React. Is that
yeah, so
Yes.
basic stuff, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think I should get into the hooks later on, but what this line is doing, use query is basically a React hook provided by Apollo. This is again a specific hook. What this does is you pass this a query argument, and what this query is, if you look at this, this is the query. So this basically use query executes that query and then returns you 3 different variables. One is the loading state, loading variable. It could be true or false. If there's an error and if not, then whatever the data is. So right after this query is executed, we are going to get these 2 different things. So if it's loading, we're going to show it's loading. If it's an error, we're going to simply return error. We're not going to move here. Do you guys follow this?
Yeah.
And then if both of these are false, that means that we have the data at our hand. So we're going to loop through that data and just render the simple currency. And we're just rendering that GraphQL functional component down there on line number 46. So that is what this page is showing us.
So, Zain, what makes it, so maybe the question for these people is that what makes it keep running? Because you come in and it's not loaded. What is it, a hooks that is making it keep going to that exchange rate function, or what is it? What's the mechanism behind it?
No, so you're saying what's the way that it's making the API call to that?
No. So it comes in the function and it says, is it loading or not loading, right? It's just loading. So you first time come in, maybe it's not loaded. Will show the loading? So then it will be done, right? The function will be done.
Yeah.
How it will come back here? Is there a way?
Yeah. So basically that's where the React hooks concept comes in. So are you guys using React functions or components, class components in the code that you're doing?
We have both. So Zain, let me ask you a question before I think we get deep into. Are you okay covering hooks next week instead of today? Do you think that would be a little bit too much for people?
So I'm not an expert at hooks, to be honest. I can give a very brief overview of that, just so that people sort of don't get way too confused. But if you want a complete thorough, I would suggest somebody who's a pro at front end like yourself. I mean, I'll be honest here, I'm not a complete front end. I'm not that basically into the React and React hooks world right now, but I know the basics. But I think I can sort of explain the very basics. And then from there, if something that further comes up, we can definitely get into that later on as well. Okay. So so let's get to the hooks after this. For now, let's make an assumption that this is what the hook did for us. We use this hook, use query. It provided us with these 3 variables, and then within these 3 variables, based on the state, we sort of rendered this function by returning the data. So this is the example that Apollo has on their website for the client. But now you would be thinking that we have our server which returns the books. Now, why are we sort of getting into the currencies and all that stuff? So now let's convert this into the books thing. Okay. So what's going to happen is I am going to change the URL of this into localhost 4000/GraphQL. Okay. And now instead of exchange rates, we have a books query. And we know what that books get exchange rates, we'll have get books. And we know books does not take any arguments. And we have the title of the book and the author name, right? And then we'll have the books function here. We'll pass in the books query. And once we have the books, we'll have the author and title. And I don't know if we need that, but let's just do a key with that. And then we'll have the title by author. And let's say books. So I don't know, usually whenever I write some code and refresh, it always breaks. So that's what's going to happen right now as well. So let's refresh. Oh, wow, it did not. We have the books coming from our own GraphQL server. Wow, that's great. So does it make sense for everybody?
How are you guys? Is everyone with us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, so on the server, this was the array that's returning the books, right? Title and author. So see the title, The Awakening by date, and the city of glass by this, right? So that's interesting. We have the list of books. So if I add any more books here, I'll let's say I have Graphql intro, and the author is name of the. Okay, so let's say we should now. Oh, I need to restart the server. Oh. By the way, we could use NodeMon to avoid restarting it again. But that's for. So yeah, we restarted it, and now we have that as well. So this is like the very basic way in which our front end connected with the back end, and Apollo client hooked into the React stuff. And basically we created a functional component where we queried the data and then rendered it into our view. So that's just the basic. So now I'll just take this one step further. I already have sort of coded that in the evening today. I'll just copy paste it from there, and then you guys can ask me if you have any questions. That'll make it a little more easier, and I'll also explain the hooks briefly in that context. So if I open, so this is
a quick question.
mm-hmm.
So so basically for GraphQL, you kind of use like the GraphQL hooks to kind of get data instead of just like making those REST API calls if we were using like Express or something else.
Exactly. Those queries that you saw in the Playground and Data Studio, this query this is how that query is done. We write that query. We already have told the Apollo client the URL of our GraphQL API endpoint. So since GraphQL is just one API endpoint, it's not based on resources. So all the requests are going to go to the same API endpoint. And that API endpoint basically expects a query or a mutation coming in. So this use query hook provided to us by Apollo, if you see, we're importing this from Apollo/client. This hook basically does the backend work for us. So this is why I'm saying this is most feature rich and most easy tool available on the market.
I see. If we, I mean, I understand like the data we have is all like, I guess, like somewhere being locally stored. If we were trying to query like a database instead, does GraphQL like provide like more tools, I guess, to do that?
Yeah. So basically what happens is if you have, so we have backends in Postgres, Mongo, Elasticsearch, and a lot of different places. And we use GraphQL to query those basically data sources. So what GraphQL provides you is every GraphQL field can have a resolver. So within that resolver function, you can say that, hey, for this particular field that the GraphQL is going to ask me, go to Mongo and do this, and then bring the result set back. And for X field, go here and do this. I'll also show you a little bit of code of our running production app and explain how we do things over there. So, but in fact, the code that I'm going to paste now is that might also give you a little bit of idea about that. So right now, you see that we have only one query. We can only query the books. That's it. But what if we want to see the books by authors? I want to have a button which says books and then an author's button. So if I press the author's button, I should see an author name and then the books under the books by that author, right? So let's add. Let me show you what. So we're going to add that to our server first, and then we're going to make sure that it works by running that into in the Studio interface. So so let's add a type author in here. So right now you see that the author is just returning the string, right? It's nothing more than that. It's a name of the author, but I want some more details about the author. So I'm going to convert that into, a proper type. So I want to make an author type which will return an ID. I'm sort of mapping this with the database. There will be a database row of author which will have an ID. So it's an ID integer. name, let's say an age, and then that author can also have a lot of books. So I'll return the books for that author. And now within that book, I can, instead of string, I'll have to tell the GraphQL that don't return the string, in fact, return the complete author type when somebody asks for author, right? So that's one change that we're gonna make. And then over here, I'm gonna add a different author's query. So now I'm telling the GraphQL schema that, hey, if somebody fetches the authors, you also can return the author type within an array, okay? Now we have this. So let's also add something here. Let's add an integer here. By the way, in GraphQL, if you add a bang exclamation mark in front of the type, it means that it's mandatory. It's a required field. So we know the integer ID is going to be required. The name is going to be required. And then we need to match this form. So books is going to be ID. Let's say 1, ID 2, ID 3. And then we have the title is fine. And then an author is going to return a complete new author, ID 1, name, like this. And then title is fine, author, ID 2, name, this. In fact, let's return 2 books for the same author. Let's do title is this, and then author, ID 2, that's the same author. So, okay. So now I just modified the data a bit. Since author is a type now, I had to match that object to the type that it's going to return. So author has name, age. So I did not write the age here. So the data has to match in the format, not necessarily all the fields. If age was an exclamation mark here, then I would need the age for each author returning as well. So since age is optional, I skipped that. So now what's going to happen is, so this is done. And we are going to, let's see if I go here. So now, like I said, there are two reserved keywords. One is query and the other one is mutation, right? And then within GraphQL, for each type, you can tell GraphQL that within this type, when somebody calls a particular field, how is that field going to be resolved? This is where, by the way, your MongoDB connection and all that stuff is going to come in to play. So basically what I'm telling GraphQL server now is that if somebody's asking for a book and then also asking for the author of that book, so what you need to do is you need to look into the resolver that I've specified for that author, the way that you should figure out what that author is. So this is, by the way, you'll know there are API docs telling you exactly what this first parameter is, the second is input, and the third is context, but I've ignored those for now. But so the first parameter is the book that's coming in. I'm just doing a lookup of authors and finding out all the authors whose ID match the book ID, the ID of the author in that book. So, but this function is missing, the authors function. So I also have that written. I'll just copy paste that function here quickly. So basically what this function is doing is, so instead of creating a separate array of authors, which has, which is basically structured in a way like, no, I don't have that example. Yeah, which is structured in a way, ID 1, name is Kate, and then books is an array of books, which is ID, it just has one book and title. So instead of making another hard-coded array, I just wrote a method which basically returns me an object like this. Does it make sense what this method is doing?
Yeah, so are you basically just pulling out all the authors from the books basically, instead of just storing all the authors separately?
Yeah. So I could have hard-coded this as well, the authors. I could have hard-coded all this, but instead of doing that, but then if I were to add another book, I would have to add the author as well. So I just wrote a function which automatically does that for me. So it
Okay.
loops through all the books, creates an authors array, and then for each author pushes the books into an array under the books key.
Okay, I see. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
So let's see what our server is gonna do now. I'm gonna restart the server. Probably some errors. Okay. Oh, mutation defined. Wait, let me just remove this. Okay, the server is running. Let's refresh our studio and see if within the schema we have the updates available. So so now we have the authors available as well. If we go to the author, we have the age, book, ID, and name. Let's see if we can query this now. By the way, if you do STL, it also sort of gives you a cleaner version of that. So let's create a new query. Query authors and ID and name. So something is not right. We are not getting the authors data somehow. That's the quickest way to fix is to just do this. I've copy pasted the data. I copy pasted the data that I had example working. Let's restart the server. Okay. So now we have the author's ID and name, this query. Now, interestingly, we also have another query where we can do the books. So we can also query the books, right? Remember? ID and title. So this is also working. So now if you want to, this is where the GraphQL magic is going to shine now. If I do author, initially it was just like this. Remember, it's just returned a string, but now this author is itself a type. So I could say that for each book that you're going to show me, also give me the author's name. So see, the name of the author is there. And I can also ask for the ID of that author. And now, since it's a graph, I can go any way that I want. Why not? We also had books under authors as well, right? Remember? So if I go back to the schema, within the author type, we could also look up the books that that author has, right? So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to find out all the books that this author has. So this is books inside author inside books. So again, we are here. So we went from book towards the author, and then within that author, we went to all the books that author has. And no one's stopping us. We can also get the author again. So so this is how you can navigate within the graph and exactly the way the front end wants. There's no limitation. There's no structure specified in REST that I have to follow if I'm a front end developer. The GraphQL sort of provides me this flexibility that I can basically do this and make the queries as I want. So this is the server side. I'm quickly gonna follow the with the client side. I have the code here. Just gonna copy and paste that here. So if I save this and refresh this, hopefully it should work. Okay. So I have the books and I have the authors. If I click on authors, I have this author and the books by that author. So now, just to give you a quick, very brief intro to books, what exactly those books do in React. So you see this book, when I press the books, I see the books. And when I press the authors button, I see the authors. So now how is React sort of maintaining which button did I press and all that stuff? So this is where the React hooks come into play. Basically, the class components have different lifestyle methods, like component did mount, component did update, and all those different methods. So over time, what React, the community, the developers of the React sort of realized that the class, I mean, I've myself seen those classes. I'm sure Naeem Bhai would also have seen those classes. The classes become so big and so huge with all those methods, component did update, mount, unmount, did unmount, and all those stuff, that it sort of became very tedious task to keep track of where the things are happening and how all these effects and the life cycle of the events are happening. So what the React community came up, the devs came up with, was a way to sort of simplify that. So they did two things about this. First, they introduced the functional components. So the functional component is simply a method which returns whatever needs to be rendered within a view. And the argument of that method is the props. So a functional component would be, for example, ABC props, and then return, let's say this is a book, right? Book, and I would return div, and within the props, I would name. So this is like a functional component. And when called from, in fact, it's probably gonna be something like book equal to, probably like this or something. It's also done over here. So this is a functional component. It has props and it simply returns book. If you were to write this in a class component style, you would extend this from React class component. You'll have a constructor which will do the props. You have the state and all that stuff. So that's the first thing that they did. The other thing that they did was to create hooks. So basically, hooks are a simplified version of the life cycle events of React. So there are two hooks that are very important in React. One is the use state, and the other one is the use effects hook. So I've used the use state hook here, I believe, somewhere. Wait, let me see. Use state. Yeah. So this again is a functional component. Sorry about that. Again is a functional component. This is an app, and initially it was like this, right? And then like this. So I had to basically, I had these two buttons, and there was no way of knowing which view to show, whether to show the author's view or the button's view. So what I did was that I said that I'll have the default view set to the books, and then if somebody clicks a button, I'll have them switch. So for this, I had to introduce a state within this functional component. So what that did was, the syntax of that state is, you basically have two variables. You define two variables in a constant, a current view, and then the second is the set current view. And these two are returned by this method, the useState hook. And the argument of that method is the default value, which basically gets set into this. So this is a, let me repeat this. So whatever I pass in this useState method is going to be the first value of this variable. So within this next line, current view will be equals to books. Does it make sense up till here? And then this is a helper method that is provided to us by this hook, which I can use to change the value of the current view variable. So what's going to happen is, so as soon as I wrote this line, I have a variable current view whose value is books. And then I also have a method set current view using which I can change the value of that. And whenever I change the value, this entire method is going to re-render again. So I then created these two buttons, and when within the on-click method of this button, what I did was I simply called that method and changed the value of that, books or an author. If you click on authors, it sets the value of the current view to authors. If you click on books, it sets the value of the current view to books. And then simply based on the value of that variable, I either render the books or the authors component. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think,
Yes.
go ahead, Afif.
No, I said yes. It's
Okay, good, sorry.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically this is the, and by the way, we can have a lot of different use states. So I can have, let's say, a counter here, and then I can say set counter. I'm just giving you an example. Let's say the number of times that we have clicked equals to use state. Let's say I'm going to say the initial value was 0. So when I write this line, I know the counter will have an initial value of 0. Okay. And then over here, let's write a button that says on click set counter, the counter value +1, okay? And yeah, increase value. And what's the value going to be? Let's also render that value. So I'm rendering the counter value, and then let's see if it works or not. I don't know, probably. Okay, so see, we have 0. If I click this, it's just simply increasing that. Do you guys follow? Cool. So yeah, this is the use state. And then there's one other hook, which is the use effects. I'll just briefly describe what this is. I'm not going to get into the detail. So basically, use effect hook is sort of a replacement of the component did mount, component did update, those hooks. This runs after the rendering is complete. So if there's something that you want to do after the render has been completed, for example, you're having a chat and you're fetching the friends list. So initially you're showing a list that says loading, and then you have use effect, which sort of fetches it from the API and then renders all the friends list that you have within that chat. So this is that thing, the use effect. It basically works after the components rendering is done. I've also added a link in the deck to read about these components. It's right, sorry, these hooks. It's right at the end. It's not that tricky. But Naeem bhai, I'll be available if the folks have any questions. I also have my email address in there. The deck, if you want to hit me up directly, feel free to do so. So that's pretty much about it. So that's basically the gist of GraphQL. If you guys have any questions, any follow-ups, more than welcome to ask.
Zain, again, thank you so much for this session. This is a lot of information, and I think it is possible that some of us might have overwhelmed with this information. But again, the reason we are also recording this is that the members of this group, they can come and watch that video again and understand if they miss out. So certainly we will have questions. So would you mind if I add you to the group, if in case people want to ask questions, they don't have to respond to everything?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead. Yeah, please. I'd love to help. Anything that I've practiced GraphQL quite a lot, many times now. So anything that you guys want help or in suggestion, I'll be glad to help in any way that I could.
Right. Perfect. So, and it's possible that maybe in one of the later sessions, we cover these hooks in a little bit more detail, and I will let you know, and then maybe you can join that session with us also to get us a little bit more understanding of that. So again, we are already over time, I think, today. So I would like every one of you guys to send me the update in the group, that where you are. You can send me the private message, or you guys can send because I don't want to take too much of your time. Tomorrow is a new week, so I think I would like to end the session here. And I would expect all of you to please send me the update where you are, and if there are any questions you guys have for me, I am open to meet with you guys tomorrow or whenever you guys want to meet on that. If you have questions on the side. And sorry, let me complete.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, what I was gonna say. So again, we thank you very much for the session, and like I said, that I'll add you to the group, and if people have questions, then we will get back to you again.
Yeah, for sure, anytime.
Go ahead, Rafa.
Yeah, if we're wrapping up, it's okay, but I just had a small question about hooks. Use effect, I just want to ask, so when you use like use state, right, and then when you change the state of that state variable using the set state or set whatever, it automatically re-renders, correct? So then when you change the state, does that automatically trigger a use effect afterwards? After the re-render is complete, then would use effect get executed?
I think it does.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So use effect will, it's more like Zain said, that after the component is rendered, it will execute that. More
okay.
like.
All right. Thank you.
And there are a lot of things in use effect. I think we don't have time right now.
Use effect is pretty.
Use effect is pretty big.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Good luck.
And Zain, you will share this PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm sharing the link with you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.